Okay, so one in our electives. I'll start by saying 2Ns are assholes. So usually one in our following happens. It's like you're prepping, you're having a great time, you have a long time to prep. The 2NC ends, they're like, we need to take some prep time. You're like, oh shit. Then the 2N shows up and is like, I didn't read these 3 cards. Also, I dropped conditionality. Can you read the conditionality block? And now all of your one in our prep is ruined. So a few things I sort of want to talk to you about today. It's like, the one in our should not be a filler speech. Okay. It has sort of a unique purpose. We'll talk a little bit about what the one in our should not be, and how to maybe manage your 2N. We'll talk a little bit about if you're a 1N and the 2N perceives that you're the weaker debater, what should the 1N do? Or if you really are the weaker debater, how do you make a 1NR effective and useful? And then what should 1Ns do to get better at 1NRs? So that's going to be sort of the larger theme. Okay. So we'll start with the 1NR as a unique speech. Okay. So the 1NR is the speech that has the most prep time, right? So you have prep before the 2NC, where the 2N is stealing all of the prep, right? They're probably spent about 5 minutes. You have 8 minutes of the 2NC. You shouldn't be paying attention to the 2NC necessarily. And you also have 2NC cross-X. So you have at least 11 minutes from the 2NC and the 2NC cross-X, and probably more because the 2N took a bunch of prep for the 2NC. So likely you have 15 minutes of prep. Okay. So that kind of means that it shouldn't be a throwaway speech, right? So it shouldn't be a place where you read the perm block if you're a K team, or I read condo and impact defense and 3 cards from the 2NC and then half of a DA. It's that should not be the case, right? So how to use the time since it has the most prep time. The first is things that need evidence comparison should be in the 1NR. Okay. Things that need evidence comparison should be in the 1NR. The 1N really is kind of the only person that has the time to really look through affirmative evidence, right? The reason why a lot of times people, for policy teams, it's my guess is that 1NRs, you've probably taken a dissat a lot, right? The reason is actually not all that incidental. It's not just oh yeah, we just give the 1NR the DA because who cares? It's in a less important part of the debate. That's obviously not true, right? It's you need the DA to win the debate. The thing that sort of the 1NR has time to do is they can read through every single piece of 2AC evidence, analyze it, read the underlined parts, figure out the citation, is this even a good piece of evidence, and then compare it against your own. So it's you do you want to put the position that requires the most reading of the evidence in the 1NR. It's partly why it's reading the perm block, for example, as a K team is kind of stupid because the perm block doesn't change. You just read it straight down, right? So it's that's actually not a 1NR thing. That should be the 2NC, right? The 2NC should be doing things that can be done quickly without thinking. The 1NR is the place where you have to do stuff that you have to read their evidence and actually, work with their stuff. Segueing, it's the 1NR is also sort of a speech where you can optimize your sound bites, right? So it's you can use all of their vocabulary. You can flow very carefully and organize all their stuff because you had so much time. You didn't have to prep during their 2AC, right? Like most 2Ns have to do. You should be able to figure out what they did the weakest. You should pick the places where you sort of read more or less ebb. So it's the thing that you want to do for your 1NR is you want to give a speech that's functionally a 30, right? It's you've been given 15 minutes. So it's you want to be able to write the perfect speech. You want to know not only just you want to use their vocabulary. So it's you want to use the exact language that they use, but you should also figure out just what are the strengths and weaknesses of the arguments that are being made, right? So it's on a dissat, not all arguments are, made equal, right? It's some arguments are pretty bad. Other arguments are pretty good. And you're uh-oh. So it's the things that you're uh-oh, this is a decent argument, you'd 3 or 4 cards. The things that you're this is dog water and could never win a debate, don't require a card, right? So it's the 1NR can make some of those choices given the time that they have to think about it. Impact calc. So the 1NR is a place where you obviously need to have impact calc. But beyond just having impact calc, if your DA is in the 1NR, you should not have the same impact calc overview. So a lot of times people will write DA files, they'll just be titled 2NC overview, where you read the same thing, and it'll say something dissat outweighs the case. 1, magnitude, US-Russia war, very big. Time frame, US-Russia war, very fast. Probability, very certain. Moving on, line by line. It's that's not a very useful impact calculus overview because it's all you did was extend the impact. You didn't compare the impact, right? It's the impact comparison part is the thing that's missing. So it's the thing that you really want to do is that you sort of want to compare your disadvantage to the 1AC, and you have sort of time to do that, right? So it's like, why is the US-Russia war impact, hypothetically, and your disadvantage something that outweighs the, I don't know, hypothetically, the global warming impact on the 1AC, right? It's like you want to do actual comparison where it's like, okay, a US-Russia war would likely be faster than global warming. Global warming, hundreds of years until we get to terminal impact. An intervening actor could fix that. US-Russia war, like slip of a button accident, like boom, dead, right? Maybe turns the case. It's like US and Russia, lack of cooperation maybe hurts warming, stuff. So it's like, whatever, I'm obviously making this up. It's like 1NR has the time to really actually do impact comparison where they're like thinking about the impact and saying specific things and writing it out, as opposed to just being like 1NR overview, like, big, fast, and certain. It's like, yeah, we got it. It's like not really compared against anything else, right? You could read a specific critique. So it's like, contrary to belief, I think it is possible to debate a 1NRK. I think a lot of people are like, this is impossible. I think the thing that you would do when you're extending a critique in the 1NR is that it should be less focused on like huge perm blocks, like framework cards and rants, like reading every trick you possibly can. It's like, oh yeah, it's the really okay, like 2NC is Baudrillard and security K and the FEMI. It's like, that's unworkable. It's like, you don't have that time. It's like, you only have 5 minutes. So like, basically the thing that you sort of want is a few things. You don't want an overview for a 1NR critique. You don't have time to like leisurely explain the critique. Okay. You should, pick the best arguments, right? And it needs to be kind of the bare bones. So it's like, the links need to be not that card heavy, but focused on using sort of 1AC language into the 1NC card. It should not be the case that you're like 4 links. It's like, no, you don't have time for 4 links. Like, you should pick the link, the best link, right? And that's it. Like, or if you're doing impact stuff, it's like you should pick the best answers that you're going to pick against util, not like, here's my 7, like, rant about util. It's like, no, like, you don't have time for that, right? Impacting arguments in relationship to the 1AC scenario. So making your stuff very specific to the affirmative, right? You're the 1N. You have a lot more time to look through the quotes that they have as opposed to the 2NC, right? I think usually the K that sort of makes the most sense for the 1NR is stuff that's like basically either easy to understand or very self-contained. So like easy to understand, I would think like security or cap, like those are things that are pretty easy to understand. So like it belongs to the 1NR. You don't need an overview being like, here is the, like, this is what capitalism is for like 5 minutes, or it's like, that's not necessary. It's like, it's not like psychoanalysis where it's like you have to describe every bit of the detail of the theory. So it's like simple enough that you can have it in the 1NR. The other is like self-contained. So like by that I mean like, let's say that you are a style of team that likes reading trolley arguments like Buddhism. It's like Buddhism, great 1NR criticism. It's like doesn't really bleed into another page, like pretty much self-contained. You can just make like one link argument about, I don't know, like something about international relations and causality and like call it a day. It's like we have a K that's like short and like sweet. That's it. Okay. So like those are sort of ways that you might think about 1NR critiques. Okay. The sort of other sort of thing that you might do with sort of the most prep time is that you can, deal with arguments that were straight turned in the 2AC. Deal with arguments that are straight turned in the 2AC. So a lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, but I think on this topic, people will try to straight turn your stuff more often than they have in previous topics, largely because almost every argument that people are reading is NATO bad, right? So it's like every critique is kind of NATO bad, and like every every DA is kind of related to NATO bad, and every counterplan kind of thinks that NATO is bad, with some exceptions, obviously. So it's like teams are likely to straight turn your stuff. So like they're more likely to just be like NATO bad, here's 8 cards, and then move on, as opposed to making any defensive arguments. So the 1NR should deal with that for sure, like not the 2NC. The reason is because you sort of want to make sure that you've read all their evidence so that you know what cards you need to read. And then the other thing is like you need to make sure you've closed all the doors, right? So it's like, let's say they read NATO bad for like 3 different impacts. It's like you need to make sure you've answered all 3 impacts or you're about to instantly lose the debate on like some impact that you dropped in the negative block, right? It's like whatever the 2NC does is totally irrelevant to the rest of the debate. It's like it's the 1NR sort of, looking through the flow and making sure that there's no part that has been conceded. That's kind of important. Okay, so 1NR is unique. You have some prep time. It's like, you can use that in those ways. Another sort of thing that makes the 1NR unique is that it's the speech that's not cross-examined. It's the speech that's not cross-examined. Few thoughts. It's useful for positions that are botched by the 2AC. Okay. It's like 2AC, idiot, dropped a DA. It's like that position should not be in the 2NC. You have telegraphed way too early. And in fact, you've given them like 15 minutes of prep time to scramble to figure out how to say that they haven't dropped the DA. You drop the DA, should be like top of the 1NR, middle of the 1NR at some point. That makes it really difficult for them to be like noticing in the one, like if you're a 1A, it's like noticing in the 1NR that you dropped a position as opposed to the 2NC is like tough. It's like, oh, right. It's like you don't have as much prep time. It's like that's kind of the style thing you want to do. The other team, yeah. So it's like, you want to, also the reason why you might sort of, use this fact is like it's useful for things that are a little stupid. So it's like the politics of this ad, like I'm sorry if you worked on that generic, the cards, not great. Not a place that I really want to be cross-examined very deeply about any of the pieces of evidence, right? Or the dip cap DA. It's like, yeah, don't really want anybody to ask about like, is like diplomacy a bag of goods? It's like, no, like I really do not want that cross-examination. So it's like speech that's not cross-ex, include the position in the 1NR that's like, I'm not really interested in people asking questions about this. I just want to read cards, right? A lot of times it is the reason why people put politics in the 1NR and not the 2NC. It's not because like the 1N is magically better at politics or something. It's because it's like we don't want to answer the questions that are like, so you think the GOP is good? It's like, yeah, like let's maybe not ask that. I'm just going to make the argument of the 1NR. You'll have to answer it, right? It's kind of the place that you want it. It's also useful for like self-contained positions, like process counterplans with internal net benefits. Those all also tend to be pretty bad. So it's like you might have noticed, like you may have read the DOS counterplan. Like the solvency cards are okay. The internal net benefit about militarization is kind of ass. It's like, do you want people to ask a lot of questions about that? It's like, no. So it's like you might include some of those processy, style arguments in the 1NR as well. The other sort of thought is, how many of you have debated 2AC add-ons? Okay, so 2AC add-ons in particular, it's like the fact that it's not a cross-ex speech means that you should not only answer the 2AC add-ons in the 1NR, but you should also think about whether you can straight turn things in the 1NR. So it's like, let's say like a 2AC add-on was like pretty stupid. It was like Prolif. It's like, it's time for the 1NR to break out all the Prolif good cards. And it's like very difficult for the other team to respond because it's like there's a whole ton of new cards that they have to like now answer. And they can't cross-ex about it either. So it's like, impact turn cards also tend to be pretty stupid, but they can't ask any questions, and it's also now for the first time being introduced to the 1NR. So it's like that's a pretty tough place for them to be in. So it's like that might be sort of a way to make your 1NR a lot more powerful, right? Finally, the 1NR is unique because let's face it, it's paid less attention to, right? So it's like teams think the 2N is primarily, an egoist that is only going for their own positions. That tends to be kind of true. Like the 2N is just going for the 2NC, and like the 1NR is like, good luck, bro, but like not going for your stuff. So it's like most of the time when 1ARs are prepping, they usually look at the 1NR and they're like, that's the bottom of the order. So it's like the DA that was in the 1NR is at the bottom of the literal bottom of the order. The critique in the 1NR that was Buddhism, yeah, that's like 30 seconds of the 1AR, right? And the thing that you want to sort of maximize there is that you want to use that to your benefit. So like the 2N, so like one of the things that I sort of suggest for 2Ns is I suggest that the 2N should be studying what is being flowed by the other team during the 1NR. A lot of times you'll find that they're not flowing at all. They're actually just prepping the 2NC position for the 1AR. And that's a pretty good indication that's like, oh, we should go for the 1NR position. Clearly they are not paying any attention. We had like a team in North Broward a while ago that like religiously only went for the 1NR. So it's like the 2NC would be like the K in case, and the 1NR would be a process counter plan. And like teams would be like, oh shit, like the scary, critique about anti-blackness, better like prep it the whole time. We would like stare at so like George, who was the debater at this, would like literally not flow and just like stare at the other team for like 5 minutes. And like after 5 minutes, he'll be like, are you flowing the 1NR? So like that's what I'm for the 2NR, like 100%. And it's like it's very obvious. Like 1AR spent 30 seconds on it. It's like clearly they didn't flow. It's like, yeah, like I literally stared at you the whole time. I know for a fact that you didn't do anything. So it's like that's like one thing that usually helps you is like if the 1NR has a self-contained position, it's very easy to be like, all right, like we're going for it, right? It's like that's like a racking up easy wins. Like I think the team after that, like we had a team that went for the 1NR in 85% of debates. Like they did not go for the 2NR, or they did not go for the 2NC in most debates. So it's like it is sort of a way to sort of duke people out. It's like people who are unwilling to, so it's like 2Ns unwilling to go for the 1NR are dumb. It's like very easy to sort of prep around that. It's not very easy to prep around people who are like, oh, I can go for the 1NR like very easily. Okay. What the 1NR should not be. Okay. So this is usually not really the fault of the 1N, but I'll sort of bring it up anyway. It's like, one, it should not be cleanup. Like, this is not like, aisle 4 needs cleanup. Like, you should not be reading like Kondo for like 130. Like, it should clean up, honestly, should ideally be happening in the 2 and C. So it's like kicking out of positions, like that does not belong in the 1NR. Like, that's actually not a very good because kicking out of positions are, weirdly enough, it's kind of time consuming. So it's like a lot of the times you'll like kick out of positions for like a minute because like you need to read conditionality good somewhere. Like there's a theory argument, you need to make sure like a straight turn is answered. So it's like you do that and it's like, oh, I now have like a 4-minute speech to give on a DA on top of the additional crap that the 2N just gave me. Right. So it's like that 1NR is a dud. Like you're definitely not going to be able to extend the disad fully or extend the position you're going for fully. So a lot of the cleanup, like kick out stuff, should be in the 2 and C. Wouldn't say top of the 2 and C because I think that's kind of too obvious. But like I would say like 2 and C should extend, their off case position they're extending, then kick out of stuff, then extend the case. Usually the 1NR takes another off case position. That's sort of my general suggestion for that. The second is the 1NR should not be using additional prep time. Like you already had like 18 minutes of prep. Like what are you doing if you're like asking for more? Like I don't really know. That's a lot. Don't use that. And then finally, the 1NR should not be useless. Okay, so okay, obviously the 1NR should not be useless, but sort of what I mean is like, and this is especially apparent versus KAFs. Like 1NRs should not be useless against KAFs. This is like a perennial problem. Like 2Ns know the 2 and C thing they're going for. Usually it's T. So they're going for T in case, and they're like, yeah, we feel really good. And then the 1NR usually gets like the dog shit at the end. So it's like you're like, oh yeah, like the throwaway cap K, like please can you extend it? And you're like, yeah, sure. Like what does it say? And the 2N's like, I don't know. Like I have no idea. Like you're just gonna have to figure this one out. Or like, like it's like 7 off. Like another version of the KF 1 and C is like it's like 7 off. It's like T the cap K like. The state's counterplan in politics. I don't know why that's even there. Like an impact turn that says hedge good, and like another thing. And then it's like, all right, I extended T in case, so like good luck, dog. Like you just pick a 1NR position, like go for it. It's like, yeah, that's a useless 1NR, right? That's actually really easy to predict because then I'm like, oh yeah, that 1NR sounded like they had no clue what was going on. So it's surely not the 2NR. It's like it's definitely only the 2 and C. So it's like it means that you need to make it such that you kind of need to know stuff that you're going for in the 1NR. So segue, what happens if you're the weaker debaters? It's like, let's be honest, sometimes we're the 1N for a reason because the 2N might just have more experience. Okay. This might not apply to you. If it doesn't, ignore me. But like for some of you, it might apply. Few thoughts about just like 1N as the weaker debater. It's like there's a couple things that you should do for sure. So it's like you should definitely have a role in the debate. It should not be the case that you're just like, mouthpiece machine, like, whatever bot 2000. It's like you should be doing stuff that's useful. Right, your voice is important, as the 1N, and not only that, this is actually to your advantage. So like teams will pay a lot less attention to you, even less attention than just the fact that you're giving a 1NR because they just perceive you're the weaker debater. So they're just going to be like, obviously the thing that this person is saying literally could not matter less, right? You should use that to your advantage. So it's like we had a team of like 2 debaters, Akash and Sebastian. Sebastian was a novice, so like he literally was new, like not to diss him or anything. But it's like it was in year 1 in debate. Akash was like year 5, so it's like there was a pretty significant experience gap. When people were debating, people just sort of like literally just ignored Sebastian's speech because they were like, "Oh, you're a literal novice." And it's like, okay, so like we kind of used that to our advantage. Like we wrote a position that was self-contained. The Sebastian would literally only extend in every debate, and then we would win multiple debates on the 1NR because people would just not pay attention to the novice that was extending arguments and reading blocks that were pretty good. So it's like that's sort of one thing that you want to do. The second is, and this sort of segues from that, it's like specialization is really important if you're sort of the younger or weaker or inexperienced debater. So it's like if you're a more policy person, it's like being able to specialize in like 2 positions where you go for it like every debate. So it's like I always go for politics or I always go for X process counterplan in the morning. Is like something that is beneficial because it's like that sort of younger debater will get the chance to like if they debate like let's say like consult Jamaica like every debate. It's like first debate rocky, not great. Second debate a little better. Third debate, and it's like by like debate number like 16, where they've extended the literal exact same position, even a novice is going to start sounding pretty okay on that position. Like they probably won't drop major things that cause you to, be unable to sort of like extend that, right? There's also K examples of this. So like I mentioned Sebastian earlier, the thing that we gave him was a word pick. So like every debate it was a word pick. We're like X word is bad, it's racist, and we don't use that word every single debate. So it's like if you give that position to someone who's more inexperienced, it's like they do it 20 times. It's like by time 20, it's not going to sound that bad anymore, right? It's like it's probably going to be a relative threat. Okay. Finally, for weaker and inexperienced debaters, you generally want to read a more self-contained position that doesn't bleed across pages. And I mean like the younger and inexperienced debater taking the disadvantage in the 1NR is not good. The reason why is like if the DA collapses, it's like the rest of your negative strategy is screwed. Like you can't win a counterplan without enough benefits. It's like what are we doing here? Like why is the DA in the 1NR? Right. You want to sort of have sort of low risk options that you can potentially kick if things go wrong. So it's like the example I gave earlier of like word pick or process counterplan. It's like that's not going to be devastating if like something got dropped. It's like okay, like whatever. Like they debated for the first time and they dropped a solvency deficit. It's like it's not going to tank the rest of your strategy, right? So it's like it makes the most sense to give them something self-contained that like maybe goes nuclear on that page, but doesn't like go nuclear across like 6 pages, right? So it's like that's kind of the general thing. Okay, so we've talked about just how do you deal with sort of potentially the weaker debater. Let's talk a little bit about what 1Ns should do to get better at 1NRs. Okay, what 1Ns should do to get better at 1NRs. First of all, speaking drills. Like Jesus Christ, 1Ns need to unload evidence. Like they need to be reading the most number of cards in the debate, more than the 2NC. And in general, like I would say, like for every card that the other team has, I would want the 1NR to have read 3 cards on that question. And so the card doc is going to get pretty expansive. I also kind of think like the 1N, so like just archetypally, I think people make a mistake about this. The 1A, 2N should not be the faster debater. It actually should be the 1N, 2A that is the faster debater. Just like think about this logically. It's like you want more positions read in the 1NC. So it's like you don't want a team to be like, oh yeah, like my 1NC is like 2 off in case. It's like, yeah, you would want more, right? So it's like, you want somebody who's faster, right? 2AC, it's like they say 10 off. It's like you can't have like the slower debater being like, okay, now on the politics DA. It's like, no, like that's awful. Like, you need them to be quick, right? Similar thought about the 1NR. It's like you need a lot of stuff going on in the 1NR. 1A, 2N is usually like the person that I think of as like the spacey, like I think about strategy, but like I'm not reading cards person. So it's like the 2NC doesn't really need to read that many cards. It's like they can just be like, here's my strategy, dog, and like that's it. And then like the 2NR can just be like, okay, like the 1NR read a lot of cards for me, so like here's my 2NR that has cards now. 1AR, like I think like yeah, like speed, but it's not really about speed. It's more about choice. So it's like usually like the person who's thinking more about strategy is like, oh, if I win this one argument, I win this entire flow, is the person that's more successful than the person that's like, here's 1,000 arguments at 1,000 words per minute in the 1AR, because it's like you'll never really catch up to the negative blocks. It's like the faster debater is the 1 and 2A. Like that's sort of the way that I always think about it consistently. It's like not really about skill level. So it's like that kind of means the 1N needs to do a lot of speaking drills. So you need to make sure you've like practiced all of your blocks, that you've read all the cards that are relevant to the positions you've specialized in, right? So it's like you need to make sure you sound good on all those things. You should, if you're somebody who extends a DA in the 1NR, you should do impact comparison drills. Okay, impact comparison drills. So these are drills basically where. So how many of you do speaking drills right now? Just be honest. Fair enough. You should do them more often. If the other thing that you should do in addition to just like doing speaking, right, is also you should practice how you debate. So it's like one of the things that's pretty useful is doing like impact comparison drills where you basically on the fly, so like give yourself like 2 random impacts and then try to give a speech on it for like 30 seconds. So like I'll be like economy and global warming. It's like I might be like economic decline outweighs global warming. 1, it causes wars because countries have to be interdependent. That's big magnitude. 2, it turns warming because the lower the economy, we don't have green tech, we don't invest in it, blah blah blah. 3, blah blah blah. It's like you want to sort of like do practice like that, so it's like you can very quickly put together impact comparison things. Some folks will even sort of do this beyond a drill. They'll literally have a file, like a little file that includes like impact comparison things between their DA impact and other stuff. So it's like, let's say your DA is always about the economy. It's like you might have a little file that's like impact comparison dash economy that basically has a bunch of things that are like econ decline turns and then like includes most common impacts. It's like econ decline turns US-Russia war, econ decline turns US-China war, econ decline turns warming, whatever else is like, in a set of, 1ACs. So it's like, you should like be ready to do impact comparison stuff, both on the fly, but if you're not somebody who can do that on the fly, then write them out, right? If you're somebody who's extending a K in the 1NR, similar thought about like link walls to, 1ACs. So it's like, one of the things that like I suggest people practicing is like, if you're always someone who's going for the K, I guess this is maybe beyond the 1 and 2. It's like, you should do some drills where it's like, you take a random 1AC, like from the Michigan 7-week Dropbox or something, and then like try to create a link wall specific to your K. So it's like, if you're a Virilio person, it's like, give yourself like, how many minutes you have for the 1NR? Like 15 minutes. It's like, you should give yourself like a 15-minute timer to like read through a 1AC and write a link wall perfectly so that you can read it out, right? So it's like, the more you do it and the more you practice it, those are drills that help quite a bit. In fact, I'm willing to sort of say that a lot of debate is less about like Turner is going to hate me for saying this. A lot of debate is less about the research component of it. Like, yes, we are in a research activity, but people who tend to be more technically proficient and sound better will win more debates. Like, I'll say like 80% of debates are won by people who sound better than 20% of people who sound like have better cards, right? I think better cards like make a difference at the highest level of the activity. So it's like, if you're debating two really good teams, yeah, it's like there's a tiebreaker that has evidence, but largely it's about like making it to the eliminations is largely about how you sound. So like, are you technically proficient? Have you done drills that help you like speak well in a speech? It's like, that's the thing that I think you should focus on for the 1N, especially since technically the 2N should be doing a lot of the negative research, right? The other thing that the 1N should do is that they should be getting speech documents. You should get speech documents. You should have 2 ACs before the debate has started, right? So one of the mistakes people make is they'll just be like, yeah, we got a 1AC disclosure. I'm like, check, right? It's like, no, that's not really enough for you to figure out like what your 1NR in the set is going to be. So like the thing that you want to do is obviously don't ask the other team, like being like, hey bro, like could I get like 2 AC UK round 1? They're going to be like, yeah, go fuck yourself. We're not going to let you prep. Instead, you should sort of like, if it's beyond the first tournament, you should figure out which teams have debated this team. The pairing will have the room number on them. You should give them an email and be like, hey, can you send me the email chain from the last debate? They will send it to you. Or like, if it's after a tournament, you might be able to just be like, oh, these are teams that we pretty regularly hit. Let me take, some of their, the emails and then like try to like ask other people. So like not them, but other people like, hey, can I like see the speech documents from this debate and like send that email out? I think that job relatively fills in for the 1N. It's like, that means you can see all the citations in advance. Sometimes you might even get the analytics, like you might get the whole block. So you might be able to practice putting together the 1NR in advance, and then everything is already written up, right? So it's like, those are sort of the, main things that you want to do if you're 1N. So it's like speaking drills really important, impact comparison stuff, and link wall drills if you're doing disad versus the critique, getting some of these speech docs so that you have all this stuff, before you sort of get there. Do people have any questions about just sort of 1NRing? / do people have questions that are more directly related to the 1NRs that they've given at this, at the interlabs or some of the interlab stuff and how to optimize it? Yeah.
So, popular 1NR that I come up with for, like, I need a 2A to say as I'm in cycle.
Yeah.
I said, like, I'm going for NATO bad, but I don't know, like, what's the balance between, like, going through the line by line and, like, just outrunning them. And I feel like there is kind of a trade-off there because you don't have every answer. And obviously, like, responding on the focus for time, but just bringing the impact card is also.
Yeah. Definitely think it's good as a 1NR position. So it's like, it is a card intensive position, and it's also a position that requires evidence comparison. So like, just logically speaking, yes, it makes sense. I think the thing that you kind of want to, so it's like, yeah, I agree that there's a trade-off. I think at the bare minimum, like you want to answer their arguments, like, just as a general concept first, right? And then it's like at the bottom of the flow, I might have additional external impacts that I can read if I have time. But it's like, I think it's okay to have one impact. It's like one of the places that you can't lose is like sustainability. So like reading like 4 cards on unsustainability for like different warrants for why things are unsustainable is a better use of time than being like, here's like kaboom number 2 and kaboom number 3, right? It's like 3 extinctions is not all that relevant, but it's like another warrant for why something is unsustainable is far more important. Or like, you really want to win, for example, like the EU can maybe have its own deterrent without NATO. It's like you might have a couple of cards that's layered on some of those positions. It's like that's probably the place that I want to read more cards on, and I think the impact section is less so. The other thing that I would say about the impact is like, I think the cards that you would want to read are more like the NATO bad impact turns the case more than like here's another external impact. External impacts are dangerous, especially on this topic, because they might get impact turn in the 1AR, and it's like a lot of the NATO bad impacts are especially tough because it's like a lot of them are wars that people can potentially say are good in the 1AR. It's like that's kind of brutal, right? So it's like I think like unlike other topics where it's like, oh yeah, like the impact is disease, and like that's pretty hard to impact around like what is disease good really, right? It's like NATO bad. It's like it's mostly like, oh yeah, it leads to like this conflict, and it's like, well, people can be like that conflict is good, that the U.S. can deter that conflict if it has NATO, right? So it's like I think like the impact, adding more impacts, less good, having more sustainability, deterrent solve stuff a little bit better, at least in my opinion. I don't know if that helps. Yeah. I think I would give different advice maybe for a different position, because like if a disad has sufficiently external impacts, then I would be like having an additional impact that is not impact turnable is good. So like politics is a place where it's like I would want another card that says the GOP is good for another reason that can't get impact turned. But it's like for NATO bad, it's like you're mostly internally turning the case. So yeah. Any other questions about 1Rs that they've given, like stuff that they, would like some help on? Is there ever an instance? I mean, possibly, but there are not that many instances. So it's like one instance would be like experience, like significant experience level gap. So like not just like a little experience gap. I mean like 4th year novice. So it's like, and even then we actually did have Sebastian with the 2A. So it's like maybe. I think the other sort of thought about this is like double ones tends to be a bad idea on the AF more than the next. So it's like, yeah, the lesser experienced debater giving the 1NR that's self-contained, fair. Like that's totally acceptable. The less experienced debater giving the 1AR is like kind of brutal. Like it's like they're extending like, other team extended 3 off and like case arguments, and you're like, yeah, good luck, Nav. Like I'll figure it out in the 2AR. It's like, yeah, probably not. Like you're actually probably going to fail in the 1AR. Like 2AR sounds very new. So it's like in that case, I would honestly recommend like, so what we've done in the past is like least experienced debater potentially do outs. It's like they give the 1AC and they give the 2AR. And it's like the more experienced debater that's more technical will give the middle of the debate. So it's like they can quickly do the 2AC. They won't drop anything in the 1AR. And then I've also recommended on top of that the 2A, so like the ins, like the 2A and the 1A are like take no prep. So like this is tough, but it's like you have to be experienced. So it's like your 2AC blocks are on point. So it's like, 1AC is given, cross X, whatever. 2AC, no prep, you give the 2AC. 1AR, close to no prep as possible. Like sometimes not as possible. I would say like maximum 1 minute, but like hopefully 0 minutes. And then the 2AR, it's like the novice gives that 2AR. You have like 10 minutes to write it. Like you have 10 minutes to communicate what that 2AR is. They can read it. Yes. Yes, that's called ins and outs. Yeah. So it's like ins is like, so it's like literally like the way you think about a speech. Like outs is like they do the outer 2 speeches. Ins is like they do the inner 2 speeches. And the thing that's like true about the 2AC and the 1AR is it requires technical proficiency. So it's like if you drop something there, it's like there's nothing you can really do to fix the debate. So it's like the more experienced debater does that, the less experienced debater potentially does the 1AC and the 2AR. That's maybe like one way I think about it, but double ones, like it's doable, but like I've never liked it. Even when we've had novices paired with varsity debaters, we've always been like ins and outs. On the neg, I would just keep it like 2N, probably the more experienced debater, 1N, probably the less experienced debater in that case. That being said, if it's like 1 year difference, like I wouldn't do it. Like it is better for the novice. It's better for you to lose a couple of debates in the beginning and for the novice to learn what debate is. And then like, if like, let's say this is like your sophomore year potentially, right? It's like, you don't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm double twos, because like the person could grow into a pretty good debater. This is like only considered when I'm like senior freshman partnership, where I'm like, senior is clearly trying to do some big things. Freshman is like, just starting. So it's like, then I'm like, all right, like maybe we'll consider sort of that partnership. Yeah, to be that way. So I don't know, pretty regulated, I think. Any other questions?